Please leave a comment where you are watching from. This story goes back to my junior year of college. I was living on campus, far from my hometown, and to be honest, I wasn't exactly thriving socially. I wasn't into the party scene, didn't join any campus organizations, and most of my free time was spent holed up in my dorm room, working on classwork or watching videos online. I was technically surrounded by thousands of people my age, but I might as well have been on a deserted island. I had one close friend, though, Marcus. He lived down the hall and was the type of guy who was always up to date on whatever new gadget or internet trend was making waves. He was a tech guy through and through, coding projects, online forums, gaming PCs, all of it. If it was digital, Marcus had probably already tested it, reviewed it, or modded it. We got along well enough, though we didn't hang out every day. My schedule was packed with assignments, and Marcus often disappeared for long stretches, vanishing into his world of tech and obscure internet communities. Still, he was the closest thing I had to a friend on campus, and I was grateful for that. Being far from home made me feel isolated in ways I hadn't expected. Phone calls helped a bit, but there was something about not seeing the faces of the people I cared about that made me feel like I was drifting. I'm not sure if anyone else feels this way, but for me, a voice over the phone lacks the warmth of seeing someone's expression, watching their eyes light up when they laugh, or even just knowing they're looking back at me. I mentioned this during one of my weekly calls to my dad. I wasn't trying to guilt trip him or anything, just venting about how disconnected I felt. That's when he suggested we try video calls. I told him I didn't own a webcam. My laptop was a few years old and didn't have one built in. A few days later, a package arrived from home. Inside was a brand new HD webcam, still in its box, with a note from my dad saying, "Now you can see us whenever you want." I was genuinely touched. I wasn't expecting him to do that, and the gesture meant a lot. The webcam itself was top tier, a Logitech model with autofocus, built-in microphone, and crisp HD resolution. I set it up right away, installed the software, and launched a video call with my parents. Seeing their faces again after so long made me feel like I was actually home, even if just for a few minutes. For the next month or so, things were better. I used the webcam regularly to video chat with my parents, and even had a couple of calls with my younger sister. It helped take the edge off the loneliness, and I started feeling a little more grounded. The webcam itself worked flawlessly. The picture quality was excellent, and the audio came through crystal clear. I'd even started using it for some of my online lectures when professors offered video conferencing options. It was just a good piece of hardware, reliable, easy to use, and surprisingly comforting. That's when Marcus took an interest in it. He was in my room one afternoon while I was finishing up a paper. He noticed the webcam on top of my monitor and immediately perked up. "Is that the new Logitech Pro?" he asked, already leaning in for a closer look. I said yes and mentioned that my dad had sent it to me. Marcus nodded approvingly, muttering something about frame rate and lens quality. Then he asked me a favor. He was working on a new project, something about starting a YouTube channel that explored digital mysteries, conspiracy theories, and weird corners of the internet. He wanted to be like a cross between a documentarian and a digital detective, uncovering strange stories from online communities, especially those on forums like 4chan or obscure Reddit threads. He needed a good camera to record his talking head segments, and mine fit the bill perfectly. In exchange, he offered to be my personal tech support. Anytime I had an issue, slow connection, software bugs, whatever, he'd fix it for free. I wasn't overly concerned about the tech support, but I didn't mind lending him the camera. We worked out a system. Whenever Marcus wanted to record, he'd text me, and I'd step out for a while. I'd go grab food, find a quiet spot to study, or just take a walk around campus. For the next couple of weeks, this arrangement worked fine. Marcus used my setup about 5 or 6 times. I watched his first few videos out of curiosity, and I had to admit they were well done. He had a surprisingly professional presence on camera, and his content was actually interesting. One video covered a mysterious disappearance that had started as a rumor on an image board. Another explored the myth and reality of the deep web. I could tell he'd put a lot of effort into research and editing. Then suddenly, he stopped asking to use the camera. At first, I figured he was busy with coursework or maybe taking a break from content creation. But when several days passed and I hadn't heard from him, I sent him a message to check in. He replied that he wasn't feeling up to working on the channel anymore. No big explanation, just a vague message and then silence. After that, Marcus seemed distant. We didn't talk much, and he stopped dropping by my room altogether. I figured maybe he was going through something personal and didn't want to pry. Then something happened that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. It was a Thursday night, and I couldn't sleep. I'd been tossing and turning for hours, feeling restless and anxious for reasons I couldn't quite pinpoint. My dorm room was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside filtering through the blinds. I rolled over, facing my desk and computer. At first, nothing seemed amiss. My monitor was off, but the CPU tower was still running. I often left it on overnight to avoid long boot times. Then something caught my attention. The tiny red light on my webcam was blinking. This webcam had a small indicator light that only turned on when the camera was active, meaning something or someone was using it. I froze. I hadn't used the webcam that day. I hadn't opened any programs that would access it. I squinted at the light, trying to convince myself that maybe it was a software glitch or some kind of delayed driver update. But the longer I stared, the more obvious it became. Someone was watching me. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and just as I moved, the light turned off. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the camera, now dormant, and tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was it a fluke? A bug? A delayed process finally shutting down? Still half asleep and thoroughly unsettled, I got out of bed, unplugged the webcam, and set it on the shelf. Then I stayed up for another 2 hours, watching YouTube videos with the volume low, trying to push the unease out of my mind. The next day I had a paper to write, so I sat down at my desk to get started. When I turned on my computer, I noticed a new file sitting on the desktop. It was a simple .txt document labeled, "Please read this." My stomach dropped. I clicked the file. Inside were just 2 lines of text. "Hey Michael, please don't unplug the webcam tonight. I like watching you sleep. I'm not doing anything bad with the footage. I promise." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling nauseous. My name. It said my name. Whoever this was had access to my system, and they'd been using my camera to spy on me, possibly for days. I yanked the Ethernet cable out of the back of the tower and turned off my Wi-Fi. Then I grabbed my phone and called Marcus. He didn't answer. I texted him, "Call me now." A few minutes later, he called back. I could tell from his voice that he was hesitant. "Hey man, everything cool?" "No, Marcus, everything is not cool. Someone hacked into my computer and was watching me through the webcam. They left a message. I need you to come over. Right now." There was a long pause on the line. "You sure it's not just a prank or something?" "Marcus," I snapped. "Please. I need your help. You know more about this stuff than I do." That seemed to do it. He agreed to come over within 10 minutes. When he arrived, he looked anxious. He sat down at my desk and started going through my system logs and browser history. As he worked, he started explaining. "Okay, so when I was prepping for that dark web video, I visited some sketchy sites. There was one in particular I probably shouldn't have clicked on." He paused, then added, "There was a prompt before accessing the page. It said something like accept to continue. I thought it was just a terms of use thing, so I clicked it." "And what happened after that?" I asked, my voice tight. Marcus looked sheepish. The system froze for a second, and then I saw something weird. It was like someone else was connected to the computer. The mouse was moving on its own. I freaked out and shut everything down. "You didn't think to tell me?" I asked, incredulous. I know. I thought it was a one-time thing. I didn't think they actually did anything. The site had a disclaimer saying they wouldn't use personal data for malicious purposes." I stared at him. "You believe that? You actually believe that?" He looked ashamed. "I messed up, man. I really did." I told him to wipe the system, back up my files, reset everything, and install new security software. I didn't want to take any chances. To his credit, Marcus worked through the night, clearing out every trace of possible malware and reinstalling the operating system from scratch. After that night, I changed. I no longer left my computer on overnight. I unplugged my webcam when not in use, and eventually replaced it with a model that had a physical shutter. Even now, years later, I can't sleep in the same room as a powered-on computer. That experience taught me that the digital world isn't just numbers and code. Behind the screen, there are real people, some of them curious, some of them malicious, and some who are just watching. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. I was in my early 20s, living alone in a small apartment in the city, working part-time and taking online classes. I was also deep into certain corners of the internet that most people don't talk about, places not meant for casual browsing. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't looking to buy drugs or weapons or anything outwardly illegal. I just always had this obsession with the hidden layers of the internet. The parts you can't reach through Google. The places most people pretend don't exist. People call it the dark web, and it's not some mythical place. It's just harder to reach. It requires specific software, like Tor, and a certain level of comfort with danger. Back then, I was both curious and naive. I spent hours at night browsing onion links, jumping from one forum to another, reading conspiracy posts, and looking at websites that sold everything from pirated textbooks to counterfeit documents. Most of it was boring, occasionally creepy, but I kept looking like I was searching for something specific I couldn't name. One night, after a long chain of random clicks and link hopping, I landed on a marketplace. It didn't have a title, just a black screen and a list of categories. Services, collectibles, digital goods, adult content. Nothing I hadn't seen before. The layout was plain, almost lazy, like it was thrown together by someone who didn't care about design. But that's not unusual in these spaces. The uglier the site, the more likely it's real. I clicked on services. A long list of vague offerings appeared. Surveillance, custom scripts, debt collection, things like that. Most of them were probably scams. I kept scrolling. Then I saw it. Girlfriend for sale. That was the title. Nothing else. No subtext, no image thumbnail. Just those 3 words. At first, I figured it was a joke. Maybe someone selling a used silicone doll, or trying to get clicks with a provocative title. I clicked it, expecting to find something stupid or over the top. The page loaded slowly. When it finished, I was greeted by a plain white background with a block of text. Selling my old girlfriend. Message for details. That was it. No images, no price tag, no backstory. Just that short message. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or be concerned. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked the reply button. I typed a message. Me, hey, just saw your listing. What exactly are you selling? A few minutes passed. I browsed other categories while I waited. Then I heard the notification ping. He had replied. Him, she's 27. Green eyes. Black hair. Freckles. A little on the heavier side. She's quiet. Obedient. Will do anything. Message me if you want photos. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't a doll. He wasn't being metaphorical. He was talking about a real person. I hesitated. Every rational part of me screamed to close the tab, shut down my computer, and forget this. But something kept me there. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Me. Can I see what she looks like? Him. Sure. 1 second. I sat in silence, palms sweating, the cursor blinking in the reply box. A minute later, 4 image files appeared in the chat. I clicked the first one. It was a woman. Early 20s, maybe mid. She was tied to a chair with duct tape around her wrists and ankles. A strip of tape covered her mouth. Her eyes were wide and red, like she'd been crying for hours. She was in a basement or garage, concrete walls, a single overhead bulb. There was a chain around her neck, fastened to a metal pipe behind her. I clicked the second image, then the third, then the fourth. Each one was worse than the last. I won't describe them. I don't want to relive them, and you don't want the images stuck in your head. But they left no doubt, this was real. This woman was being held against her will, and he was offering her up like a used appliance. I felt sick. I typed another message, hands shaking. Me, is she okay? Is she hurt? Him, she's fine. No damage. I keep her in good shape. She eats, sleeps, doesn't talk back. I stared at the screen, trying to understand what kind of person could type those words without hesitation. Then came the final message. Him, I've got someone offering $70K. If you can do 75, she's yours. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to raise suspicion, but I also didn't want to give him any reason to think I was a real buyer. I sat there for a while, then typed. Me, what's her name? It was a stupid question, but it was all I could think of. He answered immediately. Him, no names. I don't need you doing anything dumb. No police. No games. Me, I won't. Just curious. His next message made me feel like I'd been punched in the stomach. Him, doesn't matter. No one's looking for her. On paper, she's been dead for a month. That makes this transaction stress-free for both of us. He ended the message with a smiley face. I stared at the screen. I don't know how long I sat there, motionless, trying to process what I'd just read. It wasn't just the horror of what he was doing, it was his casual tone, like he was selling a bicycle or a laptop. A human being was tied up in his basement, and he was making jokes. Eventually, I closed the browser. I shut down my computer. I unplugged it from the wall, as if that would make a difference. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself I should report it. I should contact someone, Interpol, the FBI, anyone. But I didn't. I didn't take a screenshot. I didn't copy the URL. I didn't save the chat log. I was scared, not just of the seller, but of what it meant that I'd ended up there in the first place. What would I say? I was browsing an illegal marketplace and stumbled across a human trafficking ad, but I don't have proof or links because I panicked and closed everything? No one would believe me. Or worse, I'd be implicated. So I stayed quiet. I've never gone back to that site, or any similar site. I scrubbed my computer, deleted Tor, and stopped digging into the dark web altogether. The thrill was gone, replaced by something else, guilt, fear, a sick awareness of how real the darkness can be. Sometimes late at night, I think about her. Did someone actually buy her? Did she get rescued? Was she even still alive when I saw those pictures? I'll never know. Back when I was 17, I thought I was untouchable. Not in the cool kid football team kind of way. No, I was the kind of teenager who could rewire a router before I could drive a car. I hung out with two other awkward tech-obsessed guys, Ethan and Jared, and we were convinced we were the next generation of cyber wizards. Our weekends weren't spent at parties or sports events, but rather in Ethan's basement, surrounded by cables, soda cans, and the hum of overheating desktops. We spent most of our time on forums, Reddit, and occasionally 4chan. That's where we first heard about the deep web. Now, at the time, we didn't fully understand the difference between the deep web and the dark web. We just knew there was a part of the internet that wasn't indexed by search engines and wasn't accessible through Chrome or Firefox. That sounded exciting to us. Forbidden, hidden, and we wanted in. We weren't looking to buy anything illegal. We weren't trying to become cyber criminals. We just wanted to see what was out there, to test the limits of our skills, and prove we could find something most people didn't even know existed. Ethan downloaded the Tor browser, and we spent a few hours reading guides on how to safely explore the deep web. We set up a VPN, free, probably not great, and wrote down a few onion links we found on forums that were known to be entry points to the dark web. We were ready. The first few hours were boring, honestly. We found some old forums, a couple of weird blogs written in broken English, and some sites that sold pills or fake IDs. Most of the links were dead or led to blank pages. It wasn't the digital underworld we had imagined. There were no masked hackers or secret government files, just a lot of slow-loading pages and amateur coding. That's when we found the site. I still don't know if it had a real name, but the URL had the word choice in it. Something like Your Choice Market or Only Choice. It looked like a butcher's website. At first, we thought it was fake. The homepage was covered in high-resolution images of meat, sliced cuts, marbled steaks, and bone-in roasts. Each image was labeled with a cut name and a brief description of flavor profile, tenderness, and ideal cooking methods. It was surprisingly professional. The page looked more legitimate than half the restaurant sites we'd seen. We scrolled down, reading about marinating times and seasoning blends. It could have passed for a high-end meat distributor's website until we noticed the diagrams. There were human body diagrams. Each cut of meat was matched with a section on the diagram. Rib, thigh, shoulder, back, highlighted in red on the human silhouette. There was no attempt to hide what they were implying. Each product had a price, a weight range, and a note that said sourced fresh / on request only. We didn't speak for a long time. Eventually Jared whispered, "Do you think this is real?" Ethan, who was sitting at the keyboard, said nothing. His eyes were locked on the screen as he scrolled. The next section of the site was an FAQ. Where is the meat sourced? All products are acquired upon order to guarantee freshness. Is packaging discreet? Yes. All orders are sealed, vacuum-packed, and shipped in insulated containers. No identifying information is included. How do I know what I'm getting? Every customer receives a detailed profile of the donor, including age, gender, and dietary background. Custom sourcing available upon request. That last line made me feel sick. Donor? That was the word they used. There was even a section that described what seasonings pair best with each cut. Some cuts were said to have a poultry-like texture, while others were rich and gamey. They talked about fat content and muscle density. It was all described in the most clinical, detached tone, like a wine list at a fine dining restaurant. We kept scrolling. We couldn't stop. Near the bottom of the page, there was a contact us form along with a link to apply as a supplier. That part chilled me to my core. Were people selling others? Or themselves? That's when we closed the site. Ethan exited Tor, unplugged his laptop, and sat back in his chair, pale. Jared stood up and muttered something about needing air. I followed him up the basement stairs. None of us spoke about it for the rest of the night. We stayed up playing video games, pretending nothing had happened. But the images, the descriptions, the diagrams, they were burned into our memories. The next day, we agreed to delete everything. Ethan wiped his browser history, uninstalled Tor, and reinstalled his operating system. Jared threw away the notebook we'd used to jot down links. We didn't want any trace of what we'd seen. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't just the horror of the idea. It was the presentation, the clean layout, the professional design, the matter-of-fact tone. It felt real. Too real. I started doing some digging, on the surface web, of course. I wanted to convince myself it was fake, that it was a hoax like the old Red Rooms or Slender Man stories. But the more I read, the more I realized how little I knew. There were reports, buried in obscure parts of the internet, about similar sites. Allegations of cannibalism rings. Urban legends about meat markets on the dark web. Most of them were dismissed as myths. But there were enough overlapping details to make me wonder. I found a Reddit thread where someone else described a site eerily similar to the one we saw. Their post was deleted within hours. I even tried revisiting the site a week later, out of morbid curiosity. But the link was dead. Gone. Part of me was relieved. The other part was terrified that it meant the site had been moved. That it was still operating, just on a different server, under a new name, hidden deeper than before. I never told my parents about it. What was I going to say? Hey, Mom and Dad, I saw a website selling human meat last weekend. Can we talk about that over dinner? I didn't touch the dark web again after that. Jared didn't either. He actually quit our computer club at school and switched his focus to photography. Ethan still dabbles in cybersecurity, but even he admits that what we saw messed with his head. Over time, the details faded. I couldn't recall the exact URL or the full text of the product descriptions. But I never forgot how I felt reading them. The cold, clinical way they talked about people as products, as ingredients. And I never forgot the phrase at the bottom of the page. Freshness guaranteed. Source to order. Taste the difference. That line still makes my stomach turn. Sometimes I wonder where that meat actually came from. Who it came from. Were they taken? Were they desperate and sold themselves? Were they even aware? Most nights, I try not to think about it. I work in IT. Specifically, I handle network monitoring and data traffic for a mid-sized tech firm. It's not exciting work, not in the sense that people imagine when they think of cybersecurity or hacking. Most of the time, I just sit in front of a dashboard and watch data metrics crawl across the screen. Occasionally, I'll catch a spike or flag something suspicious, but in general, it's quiet. When the pandemic hit and the world shifted into lockdown, my job shifted with it. It was a blessing, in some ways. I got to work from home, set my own hours, and avoid the daily grind of commuting. But it also meant I had a lot of time on my hands. Too much, in fact. At first, I filled the silence with productive things. Learning new scripting languages, taking online courses, reading technical papers. But that only lasted so long. Eventually, the boredom crept in, and I started to fall back into old habits. Habits I'd put away years ago. One of those habits? Exploring the deeper corners of the internet. Let me be clear, I didn't go looking for anything illegal. I knew the risks. I'd seen what happens when people start poking around the dark web without the right safeguards. My curiosity wasn't criminal, it was academic. I wanted to see what was out there, what people were doing, and how the deeper web had changed since I'd last explored it. I set up a secure environment, fresh install of Tails, routed through Tor, with a vetted VPN and multiple layers of encryption. I was careful. I always am. At first, it was the usual fare. Onion directories, dead links, forums trading in conspiracy theories and fringe science. I expected that. I even found an old site I recognized from years ago, still running, still as broken as ever. But then one night, I found something different. It was a dating site. Yes, a dating site on the dark web. That alone was strange. Most of the sites in those parts are marketplaces, forums, or hidden services. But this one was clearly structured like a dating platform. It had a login screen, user profiles, search filters. The design was plain but functional, text-heavy, with minimal images and a grayscale color scheme. I created a dummy account. I used a throwaway identity, no real photos, all routed through my secure browser. I wasn't planning to interact. I just wanted to look. Once inside, I started browsing. The site was divided into categories, very specific categories. You could search by age, gender, location, orientation. But beyond that, there were filters for things I'd never seen on any mainstream dating site. Filters for medical conditions, fetishes, kinks I didn't even recognize. One section caught my eye. It was labeled simply, chasers. I hovered over it for a moment. No tooltip, no description. Just that one word. I clicked. The page loaded slowly. When it finished, I was met with a list of user profiles. At first glance, they looked like any other dating site bios. Usernames, ages, locations, short blurbs. But as I read through them, I realized what connected them all. These people weren't looking for love. They weren't even looking for companionship in the traditional sense. They were looking to catch diseases. Each profile was a variation on the same theme. One man, in his mid-30s, had written, looking to fulfill a lifelong dream of being with someone HIV positive. I want the connection, the experience, and the risk. I'm healthy, discreet, and serious. Willing to compensate. Another listed, COVID chaser. Recently exposed but didn't catch it. Looking for someone actively positive. Preferably within first 5 days of symptoms. Let's make it happen. There were dozens. Some were written with almost clinical detachment. Others read like love letters to illness. A few even included medical records as proof of their own infection status, advertising themselves as donors. I kept reading, horrified and fascinated. One profile, a man in his 50s, described himself as a lifelong devotee of terminal intimacy. He was interested in women with cancer. The more advanced the stage, the better. He claimed it was about emotional depth, about sharing the fragility of life. Another user was seeking someone with syphilis. Not to avoid it, but to acquire it. They were all willing to pay. Some offered to cover medical bills. Others promised lavish gifts, overseas travel, or monthly stipends. One man offered to pay $10,000 in Bitcoin for a single night with someone who had just tested positive for HIV. I stopped reading after that. I closed the page, shut the browser, powered down my system. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at my reflection in the black screen. I'd seen plenty of strange things on the dark web before, but this was different. This wasn't about money or crime or even power. This was about something deeper, something broken. I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was just a small group of fringe users, indulging in fantasies they'd never act on. But that wasn't true. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how real it was. The detail in those profiles, the medical records, the desperation. These weren't trolls. They were serious. And then I did something I regret. I went back. A few days later, unable to shake what I'd seen, I logged in again. The chasers section had grown. There were new profiles, new messages, new requests. I clicked on a user named Gift Giver. Male, 42, from the Midwest. His profile photo was a stock image of a smiling man in a button-up shirt. Totally generic. But his bio was anything but. Newly pause. Viral load high. Looking to gift someone who understands the intimacy of transfer. I don't want protection. I want connection. I want you to feel what I feel. Serious inquiries only. No judgment. No fear. There was a contact button below. I didn't click it. I couldn't. I logged out. Again. But for weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the psychology behind it. Was it a desire for control? For meaning? Was it self-harm disguised as connection? I started reading about it on the surface web. The phenomenon is real. It's called bug chasing. People who intentionally seek infection, often with HIV, as part of a fetish or perceived identity. Some see it as a form of bonding. Others romanticize the risk. Some believe it gives them a sense of belonging, a shared experience. And some are simply broken by trauma, seeking pain as a form of punishment. I don't pretend to understand it, but I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't a fantasy. These people exist. That site still exists, and I've never logged back in. Not because I'm afraid of what I'll find, but because I know I'll find it. It's still out there, growing. evolving, a community of people chasing something they should be running from. I've since reported the site to a few digital watchdog groups. I don't know if anything happened. I doubt it. These sites are hard to shut down. They change domains, shift servers, hide behind layers of encryption. And the users? They just find new homes. But I had to try. I've always been a tech guy. The kind of person who was taking apart old PCs in the garage while other kids were kicking soccer balls or riding bikes. I built my first computer when I was 12. By the time I turned 30, I was working full-time in cybersecurity, running network diagnostics, and consulting on data protection for mid-sized companies. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm saying it because I know what I'm doing. I know how to trace an IP address, how to detect packet sniffers in a network, how to lock down a machine so tight that even a determined hacker would struggle to find a way in. I've spent years learning the ins and outs of internet security, surface level and below. And that's what led me to the story I'm about to tell you. Back when I was working long overnight shifts doing server monitoring, I often found myself with long stretches of downtime. Nothing to do but wait for alerts that rarely came. So, I started exploring. Not Reddit or YouTube, I'd already exhausted those. I started digging deeper. The dark web. For those who don't know, it's not some magical underground world you access with a secret password. It's just a portion of the internet that isn't indexed by traditional search engines. You need specific tools like the Tor browser and a little knowledge to navigate it. Most of what's there is boring. Marketplaces selling sketchy pills, forums full of conspiracy theorists, and a lot of low-effort scams. But sometimes, if you know where to look, you'll find something that sticks with you. Something that changes how you see the world. One night, I stumbled onto a site that looked almost innocent. The homepage had a simple layout. White text on a black background. No flashy graphics. No auto-playing videos. Just a minimalist design and a single header at the top. The path to ascension. There was no mention of what the site was about. No introduction. Just a button that said enter. I clicked it. The main page loaded slowly. Onion sites often do. And when it did, I was greeted by a wall of text. Paragraph after paragraph of spiritual language. It talked about transcendence, rebirth, the shedding of mortal constraints. It was written like a religious manifesto. I skimmed through it, expecting the usual doomsday cult nonsense. But the more I read, the more unsettled I became. They weren't talking about metaphorical rebirth. They believed the way to ascend, to become more than human, was through consumption. Literal consumption. Of human flesh. I scrolled down, and the philosophy became clearer. To consume another is to absorb their essence, their energy, their soul. In this act, we leave behind the mortal coil and begin the transformation. It was cannibalism, not just as a practice, but as a belief system, a doctrine. They called it divine flesh. The site had multiple sections, one labeled teachings, another called ceremonies, and one, disturbingly, titled preparation. I clicked through them, half mesmerized, half recoiling. The teachings section was a collection of essays written by the group's founder, someone who called himself the Shepherd. He claimed to have received visions from what he referred to as the true God, an entity that rejected the laws of the physical world and demanded sacrifice through communion. He spoke with absolute conviction. He described the act of eating another human being as sacred. He claimed it unlocked hidden sequences within the DNA, granting spiritual clarity and even physical superiority. It was delusional, but the site wasn't satire. There were no jokes, no irony. The writing was intense, serious, and disturbingly calm. I clicked on ceremonies. This section described the group's rituals. Most were written in vague, poetic language. But the implication was clear. These weren't symbolic ceremonies. They involved real people, real bodies. There was mention of voluntary ascension, of members offering themselves to the group as vessels. There were even testimonials, supposedly written by members who had participated in these rites. When I tasted the offering's heart, I felt reborn. I saw light inside the dark. I knew then that the shepherd's words were true. I felt sick, but I kept reading. I don't know why. Maybe I was trying to convince myself that it was fake, that it was some elaborate role play or a twisted art project. The preparation section destroyed that illusion. It contained detailed instructions, diagrams, cooking temperatures, safety warnings about pathogens, flavor profiles depending on age, muscle density, and diet. It read like a high-end cookbook for human meat. It also included a list of recommended cuts: thigh, shoulder, cheek, liver, each with descriptions about texture, flavor, and best cooking methods. I remember one line that made me physically recoil. The meat of a young adult, especially one who exercised regularly, carries a fine-grained texture similar to veal, but with a richness that pairs well with wine-based reductions. It was written with the detached tone of a food critic. At that point, I almost closed the site, but something caught my eye. A link at the bottom of the page labeled Our Family. I clicked it. Dozens of profiles loaded. These were the members. Each had a screen name and a brief bio. Some included vague photos, shadows of people standing in candlelight, or silhouettes kneeling before stone altars. Their bios listed their rank within the group, how many ceremonies they'd attended, and their preferred preparation. Some even included statements like, "I'm seeking a partner to share in our next offering. Must be serious. Must understand the sanctity of the flesh." I scrolled through them, feeling a deep, growing dread. These weren't just lurkers. These were true believers. They weren't here for shock value or curiosity. They believed in this, and they were recruiting. There was a section labeled Join Us. It had a form where you could apply to attend an initiation gathering. The application asked for disturbing information, medical history, physical fitness level, blood type. And then came the final question. Are you applying as a witness or as an offering? I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went back to the site. I needed to know if it was still there, if I'd imagined it. It was still active. Nothing had changed. The same pages, the same words, the same smiling faces and shadows. I copied the URL and sent it to a friend of mine who works in digital forensics. I asked him to look into it, off the record. I didn't tell him what it was, just that it was a potential lead on something illegal. A few days later, he called me. "Where the hell did you find this site?" he asked. I told him I couldn't say. He said he ran some scans and tried tracing the server. It was bouncing through so many relays that he couldn't pinpoint its origin. But he did confirm one thing. It wasn't just a fake front. "There's real traffic going in and out," he said. "Encrypted. But it's active. Someone's keeping this thing alive." I didn't ask him to dig further. I didn't want to know more. But sometimes I think about that form. That final question. Witness or offering? And I wonder how many people have clicked offering. How many were serious? How many actually showed up? Worse, I wonder how many never came back. I never visited the site again. I kept the URL for a while, locked in an encrypted note on a flash drive. Eventually I deleted it, not out of fear, but because I didn't want the temptation. I didn't want to look again. I was working as a freelance cybersecurity consultant at the time, mostly taking short-term gigs from local institutions that couldn't afford a dedicated IT department. Libraries, municipal offices, charter schools. They'd call me in when something broke or when they needed to update their firewall settings, but didn't know how. That's how I ended up working for Westridge Elementary. It was a quiet school just outside the suburbs, 2 buildings, a playground, and an ancient server room that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. They'd recently received a small grant for tech improvements, and the principal, a woman named Ms. Carlisle, reached out to me through a friend of a friend referral. She was warm, organized, and clearly overwhelmed by the task of digitizing a school still running on Windows 7 machines. My job was straightforward: audit the network infrastructure, recommend upgrades, and install new monitoring tools to catch any potential breaches. The first few days went smoothly. I mapped out the topology, cataloged the devices connected to the network, and replaced their outdated router with a more secure model. Most of the work was routine, until I started digging into the server traffic logs. One packet caught my eye. It came from a non-school IP address routed through an open port, 8080. That port isn't inherently suspicious, but the traffic moving through it was encrypted in a way that didn't match the school's usual protocols. I flagged it and kept watching. Over the next 48 hours, I logged 5 more pings to that same port, all from masked IPs, all using onion routing protocols, meaning Tor traffic. That was my first red flag. Tor traffic on a public elementary school's network? No normal user at the school would be using the Tor browser, especially not the students. I decided to trace the logs further back and found that the connection had been active, on and off, for at least 3 months. I thought maybe one of the teachers was using a personal laptop to browse anonymously, maybe even access academic journals behind paywalls. But the data told a different story. The traffic wasn't outbound, it was inbound. The server was receiving requests, and those requests were being processed. I took a closer look and discovered an unusual folder buried deep inside the school's file structure. It was nested within layers of generic labels: backup, temp, sys. But when I decrypted the contents, I found something I wasn't expecting. Transaction logs. Thousands of them, each one timestamped and marked with a hexadecimal ID. At first glance, they looked like routine uploads, small file sizes, all under 5 megabytes. But the metadata told a different story. Each file was a transaction confirmation, Bitcoin wallet IDs, payment amounts, brief messages in a mix of English and Russian. I cross-referenced a few of the wallet IDs with public blockchain explorers. The amounts were huge. Some were in the $2,000 to $5,000 range. Others were significantly larger, $20,000, $50,000, all within the last 6 months. Someone was running a dark web marketplace through this school's server. I sat back from the keyboard, stunned. This wasn't just a botnet or a proxy server. This was active participation, whether intentional or not. The server was being used to store and process illegal transactions. And the kicker? The school had no idea. I went into the logs and found that the script handling the transactions was set to run automatically. It launched with a daily cron job, disguised as a printer monitoring service. Whoever set it up knew exactly what they were doing. They'd installed it to hide in plain sight. I checked the origin date of the script. It was installed 9 months earlier, long before I got there. I downloaded everything I could: logs, scripts, configurations, and dumped it all onto an encrypted USB drive. My instinct was to contact law enforcement immediately, but I hesitated, not because I didn't want to report it, but because I didn't know how to explain it without implicating the school. This wasn't a case of negligence. This was exploitation. Someone had hijacked a public school's outdated infrastructure and turned it into a tunnel for criminal activity. I went to Ms. Carlisle instead. It was late afternoon, the school mostly empty except for a few teachers grading papers. Her office was modest, framed student drawings on the walls, a coffee mug shaped like a crayon. I explained everything carefully. I showed her the logs, the traffic patterns, the Bitcoin traces. I made it clear she wasn't in trouble, but that her school's server was being used for something deeply illegal. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "And you're sure it's not just spam, like bots or junk traffic?" I shook my head. This is too structured, too intentional. It's a payment processing mechanism. Someone's laundering money, or something worse, through your system. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked, "What do you recommend we do?" I told her the only real option was to wipe the server completely, replace it with secure hardware, and report the incident to the authorities. I offered to make the report myself, since I had the logs and documentation. She agreed. She thanked me for my help. I never heard from her again. I filed the report with a federal cybercrime tip line. I submitted the logs, the wallet IDs, everything. I expected to be contacted, at least for a follow-up. But nothing came. No email. No call. No acknowledgement. A week later, I checked the server remotely. Nothing had been wiped. The port was still open. The traffic was still flowing. I don't know if Ms. Carlisle changed her mind, or if someone higher up told her to stay quiet. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she didn't believe me. Or maybe what I really fear, she did believe me and chose not to act. I stopped checking after that. I deleted the access credentials. I burned the USB drive. I walked away. I still think about it, though. How many other public servers are being used like this? How many small institutions with weak security are serving as blind spots for dark web operations? And how many people are content to look the other way, as long as they don't have to understand what's happening? I work in enterprise security now. Bigger clients, bigger budgets. But every so often, when I'm scanning ports or auditing firewall rules, I think about port 8080. I've always had a bad habit of poking the bear. It started when I was 13, trolling online forums for fun. I didn't think of it as harmful. I never targeted anyone personally, never doxed anyone, never crossed that line. For me, it was like a game. I'd find a post that reeked of ignorance and throw in a sarcastic comment. Sometimes I got banned. Sometimes I got cheered on by other lurkers. Either way, I moved on. By the time I got to college, I had mellowed out somewhat. But I still found myself lurking in the darker corners of the internet. Not for trolling, not anymore. By then it was curiosity. Academic, even. I was studying sociology, and I had this obsession with online subcultures, especially the ones that existed away from mainstream attention. So when I found the forum, I wasn't looking for trouble. It was buried deep in a Tor directory, accessible only through a long chain of onion links I found in an encrypted file posted to a now-defunct subreddit. The forum had no name, just a header that read, "Truth Through Fire." It was a conspiracy board, not the fun kind, no flat earth memes or Bigfoot sightings. This was the heavy stuff. Government mind control, racial purity theories, occult warlords secretly controlling the economy. The users weren't just theorists, they were believers. Fanatics. I started reading through the threads. At first, I treated it like fieldwork, like I was studying another species. The grammar was erratic, the paranoia was thick, and the hatred was palpable. Every thread seemed to spiral into some version of the same conclusion. We are being replaced. They control the media. Wake up! I didn't post. Not at first. I just read. Observed. But the more time I spent there, the more disgusted I became. The racism wasn't subtle. It was central. Entire posts dedicated to calculating the ideal skin tone for survival. Users swapping photos of interracial couples and spewing bile in the comments. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, sickening, but impossible to look away from. Then I saw a thread that pushed me over the edge. The title was, "How to Spot Hidden Race Traitors in Your Classrooms." Inside was a wall of text claiming that universities were infiltrated by agents of cultural rot, students and professors who promoted weakness, degeneracy, and interracial breeding. The post included a list of warning signs, like wearing inclusive pins or speaking up against hate speech. It ended with a call to action. If you see one, name them. We'll do the rest. That's when I snapped. I created an account, burner email, fake handle, secure route through Tor. I replied to the thread. You guys are a bunch of keyboard cowards. You'll never do anything. Your IQ is lower than your browser's refresh rate. I signed it. Your friendly local race trader. It got a reaction. Within 10 minutes, my post had replies. Dozens. Some calling me a fed. Others calling me a target. One user, with the handle obelisk, stood out. He wrote, "You sound brave behind a screen. We'll see how brave you are when the screen blinks back." It was creepy, sure, but I didn't take it seriously. These people were unhinged, but they weren't organized. They were too paranoid to trust each other, let alone coordinate anything real. I logged off and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to find 3 emails waiting in my inbox. The subject lines were identical. You made a mistake. The senders were gibberish, random letters and numbers. I opened one. Inside was a screenshot of my dorm building. Not the outside, the interior. The common room, taken from the hallway camera. I recognized the worn couch, the vending machine, even the coffee stain on the floor near the microwave. The timestamp was last night, less than 2 hours after I posted. The second email had a screenshot of my class schedule. The third had my full name, phone number, and home address, my real home, not the dorm. My stomach dropped. I immediately shut my laptop, unplugged it, and sat there in silence. I hadn't given out any personal information on the forum. I'd used a burner email. I was behind a VPN. I was invisible. At least, I thought I was. I scrambled to check my setup. My VPN had been running, but I'd forgotten to check for DNS leaks. I ran a test. There it was. My ISP had bled through. Just once. Just enough. All it took was a single slip. I called campus security and asked if the dorm cameras had been accessed. They said no, not by anyone unauthorized. I didn't tell them the full story. What could I say? Hi, I provoked a group of online radicals, and now they're watching me. I spent the next 48 hours in a haze of paranoia. I unplugged all my devices. I covered my webcam. I changed passwords, wiped drives, reformatted my phone. I even slept with a pocket knife under my pillow, which sounds stupid now. But at that moment, I didn't know what else to do. Then I got the message. It came through my university email, my real one, addressed to my full name. No subject line, no sender, just a single sentence. You don't get another warning. Stay quiet. That was it. No threats, no demands, just a line. I never replied. I never posted on the forum again. I deleted the burner account, wiped my Tails install, and never used Tor on campus Wi-Fi again. The email stopped. I've told this story to maybe 2 people in real life. I never reported it to the school. I didn't want to explain how I'd ended up there. And I knew that, without evidence, no one would take it seriously. But I learned something important that week. The internet isn't anonymous. Not really. Not unless you're perfect. And no one's perfect. You make one mistake, one leak, one click, 1 second of carelessness, and you're exposed. And there are people out there who live for that moment, who wait in the shadows, watching, ready to pounce. I didn't poke the bear that night. I walked into its den and slapped it across the face. Now I know better. Now I stay out of the dark. I've worked in cybersecurity for 10 years. Most of the time it's dull, firewall audits, phishing simulations, patch management. But every now and then, I stumble onto something that makes me wish I never opened my laptop in the first place. This wasn't my job. It started as a side project. I'd been tracking infrastructure anomalies on hidden services for a research paper I was co-writing with a colleague. The goal was to identify how smaller dark websites recycled back-end code, reused server certificates, or leaked metadata across supposedly unrelated domains. I wasn't expecting to find anything big, just patterns, repetition, lazy coding. Then I found New Life Border Solutions. The site was hosted on a.onion domain, buried 3 layers into a redirection tunnel only accessible through a link posted on a now-defunct immigration forum. The landing page was clean, simple, no broken English, no flashing banners, just a logo of 2 hands shaking over a globe and a tagline. We provide guidance, documentation, and safe resettlement for families seeking a better life. It looked professional, too professional. I bookmarked it and moved on. But 2 days later, I ran a scan on a different dark web escort directory, one-eyed flagged for suspected money laundering. I was analyzing the site's SSL fingerprint when I noticed something strange. Both it and New Life Border Solutions were using the same certificate. That shouldn't happen. Not if they were truly separate entities. I dug deeper. From the certificate, I found they were hosted on the same VPS node. Masked, yes, but leaking just enough handshake data to confirm overlap. That's when I started suspecting something worse. I opened both sites side by side. One promised immigration assistance. The other offered escort services. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the host sold space to multiple clients. But then I noticed the overlap in terms of language. Phrases like safe relocation, private transport, and no questions asked. Both sites promised discreet, reliable handling of sensitive individuals. The wording was too similar. On the immigration site, applicants were asked to fill out a contact form. Name, country of origin, age, desired destination, preferred job type. That last one raised red flags. Job type? I clicked on the drop-down. It offered a short list. Domestic cleaning, hospitality, companion services, other describe. I checked the source code of the form. Hidden fields tracked IP geolocation, browser fingerprinting, and a field tagged suitability index. That wasn't a contact form. It was a filter. They were profiling users. I rerouted traffic through a sandbox and submitted a test entry, posing as a 22-year-old woman from Eastern Europe seeking work in Canada. Within 12 hours, I got an encrypted message via the site's internal messaging system. It read, "Thank you for your interest. Our intake team has reviewed your submission and determined that you are an ideal candidate. Travel arrangements can be made within 2 to 3 weeks. A handler will reach out with further details." Handler. I checked the escort site again. Their listings were vague, just first names, ages, regions. But none of the escorts had reviews older than 6 months. No established histories. No digital footprints elsewhere. It was as if they had appeared out of nowhere. I started cross-referencing images using reverse search and AI facial recognition. Out of 15 profiles, 12 had photos that didn't appear anywhere else on the internet. Not on social media. Not in stock galleries. Not even on adult content aggregators. They weren't performers. They weren't freelancers. They were ghosts. It clicked for me then. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a funnel. Vulnerable people, many likely desperate, possibly undocumented, were being lured with the promise of immigration help, then rerouted into trafficking pipelines. The New Life site was the lure. The escort site was the endpoint. I didn't sleep that night. I packaged all the data I'd collected, SSL logs, traffic routes, form metadata, image hashes, and sent it to a contact I had in a nonprofit that specializes in digital evidence of human trafficking. She responded within hours. We've seen this pattern before. The sites rotate every few months. The language changes, but the back end stays the same. We've flagged 3 similar operations this year alone. I asked if anyone had been arrested. She said no. The admins are careful. They use cutouts. The victims rarely speak English or know they're being trafficked until it's too late. By the time they realize it, they're already stripped of ID, isolated, and told they owe travel debt. I asked if there was anything else I could do. Send us more. Anything you find. But don't engage directly. These people are watching. I closed the tab, deleted my test account, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd barely scratched the surface. I thought about the people who had filled out those forms in good faith, believing they'd find safety in work, only to be sold and renamed and trapped. I thought about how easy it was to hide such a network behind a clean interface and a handshake logo. And I thought about how many more were out there, waiting for a better life, not knowing what they were actually walking into. I wasn't looking to score anything hard, just a refill. I'd been prescribed Adderall since high school for ADHD. By my second year of college, I was still on it, but my new campus clinic had started tightening up their distribution. They were suspicious of students asking for refills too early, especially during midterms. That's when I ran out. I wasn't addicted. I just needed to focus. I had 2 exams and a paper due in the same 72-hour stretch. Without the meds, I was a mess, distracted, fragmented, spiraling through tabs and half-finished thoughts. So, I did what a lot of students do but never admit. I turned to the dark web. I'd done it once before, during finals the previous semester. A friend of a friend showed me how. It wasn't that complicated. Tor browser, Bitcoin wallet, and a vendor marketplace. You could buy almost anything: stimulants, benzos, painkillers. Some vendors even offered overnight shipping if you paid extra. I remembered the vendor I'd used last time. His username was NordicRx. He had a clean profile, nearly 2,000 completed transactions for 0.9 star rating, and a reputation for being fast and discreet. His product listings were detailed, with proper dosage info and photos of blister packs. It felt weirdly professional. So I logged back in, found his page, and placed a small order, just 10-20 milligrams tabs. Enough to get me through the week. I paid in Bitcoin from a wallet I'd set up through a mixer, just to be safe. The next day, I got a message from him. Order received. Processing now. Thanks for the repeat business. I responded politely. No problem. Appreciate the quick turnaround. He replied almost instantly. You remembered me, smiley face. That gave me pause. Sure, I'd used the same username. But vendors usually didn't get chatty. Most stuck to order confirmations and logistics. It was possible he just recognized the name, but something about the smiley face made it feel off. I let it go. 2 days later, the package arrived. It came in a small padded envelope, no return address, my name printed neatly on the front. Inside was another layer, foil wrapped and vacuum sealed. I opened it carefully, but inside wasn't medication. It was a small glass vial, and a note. You shouldn't have been rude. I stared at it, confused. I hadn't been rude. I'd thanked him even. Unless he was referring to something else. Something from before. I went back through our old messages. 6 months ago, during my first order, I'd asked about shipping delays. He'd responded with a passive-aggressive tone, and I'd pushed back with a sarcastic message. Didn't realize professionalism was optional here. That was it. That was the rudeness. I hadn't thought about it since. But apparently he had. I examined the vial. It was filled with a murky, amber liquid. Floating inside were several thin, pale objects. At first I thought they were slivers of wood. Then I realized they were fingernails. Fingernails. Cleaned. Clipped. Suspended like specimens. I dropped the vial and scrambled away. My heart was pounding. My skin went cold. I wrapped the vial in plastic, packed it in a box, and drove it to the campus police. I told them I'd received it anonymously. No, I didn't know who sent it. No, I hadn't opened it. They logged it as suspicious and promised to send it out for testing. I didn't mention the dark web. I couldn't. I deleted my account that night, wiped my wallet, burned my backups. But I couldn't stop thinking about what the message implied. You shouldn't have been rude. As if it were personal. As if I'd crossed some unspoken line. I started imagining things. Was the vial a warning or a trophy? Were those fingernails his? Someone else's? Had he done something to another buyer who complained? A week later, I checked the site again. Nordicerx's page was gone. His listings, his reviews, his profile vanished. I searched the forums. Some users speculated he'd been arrested. Others claimed he'd been burned, taken out by competitors. One post stood out. Vendor NordicRx ghosted after sending body parts to a buyer. Anyone got info? No one replied. I never heard from him again. But that vial, it changed something in me. It reminded me that the people behind these usernames aren't abstract. They're not just vendors or clients. They're real. And some of them are dangerous. You think you're anonymous. You think it's just a transaction. But then one day a package arrives, and you realize someone out there knows your name, and they remember everything. I've always been online. Not in the casual, scrolling through Instagram way. I mean deep online. IRC chat rooms, abandoned forums, encrypted message boards, the kinds of places where you don't use your real name. Not even close. I was raised by the internet. Not in the wholesome sense. In the survivalist, keep your IP private or else kind of way. When I was 15, I started going by the handle No Girls on Net. It was a joke at first. A nod to the stupid meme you'd see in every old school gaming forum. There are no girls on the internet. I thought it was ironic. A way to blend in. Disarm them before they questioned me. I never used a real photo. Never gave my location. I learned early that being a girl online came with a cost. So I hid it. I used a neutral avatar and typed in lowercase. No emojis. No exclamation points. I figured the more invisible I was, the safer I'd be. I was wrong. It started with a thread. I was 19 in college, studying computer science, and still active on a few obscure forums that had drifted into Tor-only territory. One of them was called The Lantern. It wasn't inherently illegal, at least not on the surface. Mostly paranoid dudes sharing theories about surveillance, security, and how the elites were using the internet to control us. I'd been a member for about a year. I didn't post often, but I had a reputation. I helped people with encryption issues, corrected bad OPSEC advice, and occasionally dropped a code snippet or two. Most users assumed I was a guy, and I didn't correct them. But in one thread about browser fingerprinting, I slipped. Someone posted a long rant about how women can't code, and how the internet should be a male-only space. I shouldn't have responded. I know that, but I was tired, irritated, and not thinking straight. So I replied, I'm a woman. I code. And I just disproved your entire post with 3 lines of JavaScript. The replies came fast. Some praised me. Others laughed. But one user, 0xShepherd, posted something different. Liar. No girls on the net. Let's find out who you really are. I ignored it. You get used to threats on these platforms. Empty noise. Keyboard warriors flexing behind proxies. I logged off and went to bed. The next day I got an email. My personal email. The subject line was, Hi Emily. I froze. I hadn't used that email for anything related to the Lantern. It was tied to my school account. My friends. My resume. I opened it. Inside was a single sentence. Nice dorm room. You should close your blinds at night. I slammed the laptop shut like that would erase it. I ran through possibilities. Had I clicked a bad link? Downloaded something? My setup was solid. Tails OS Tor, no JavaScript. But I'd been using a regular laptop the night before. Windows. I'd clicked on an image someone posted in the thread. An image. I booted into a secure environment and checked the file. It had been a PNG, but the EXIF data was bloated, stuffed with extra code. A payload. It had deployed malware the second I opened it. I ran a scan. He had root access. Not just malware. Full control. He'd been watching. I wiped the machine. Reformatted everything. Got a new laptop the next day. But the damage had already been done. That night, I got another email. Nice try. I liked the old wallpaper better. The one with the cherry blossoms. He was still in. I stopped using my devices. I borrowed a friend's phone just to send a warning to my brother, Mark. He was a police officer in a nearby town. I didn't want to tell him everything, not at first. Just that something weird was going on. Could he check on me sometime that week? He said he'd drop by tomorrow. That night, I went analog. No screens. No lights. I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., there was a knock at the door. I didn't move. Another knock. Louder. I crept to the peephole. It was him. I didn't know how I knew. Just that I knew. He was dressed in black, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. His face was partially obscured, but he was holding something in his left hand. A phone? A camera? He knocked again, then said softly, "Emily, I just want to talk." I backed away, my heart pounding in my ears. Then my phone buzzed from the table. A new message. "If you won't let me in, I'll come back tomorrow. Or the next day. Or the next." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The knocking stopped. I waited until dawn, then left the dorm and went to the campus police. I told them everything, well, most of it. They took a report, but didn't seem convinced. "Did you see a weapon?" they asked. "Did he try to break in?" "He knew my name," I said. "He knew what my room looked like." They said they'd increase patrols around the building. That was it. Then Mark showed up. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans, a hoodie, and that cop look he can't turn off. I told him everything. The forum, the malware, the emails, the man outside my door. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said, "You're coming with me." We drove to his apartment. He disconnected my devices, ran forensic tools, and confirmed what I already knew. I'd been compromised at the kernel level. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't just a troll. He was skilled, focused, and obsessed. Mark filed a formal report with the department and sent a request to the FBI cybercrime unit. He told me not to go back to the dorm, not to check my email, not to use the internet at all. I stayed with him for 3 days. On the 4th night, we came back from grabbing groceries. Our building was quiet, too quiet. Mark knew it before I did. He drew his weapon and told me to stay behind him. We walked up the stairs slowly. At the top, the door to his apartment was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The living room was dark. Then we saw it. My laptop, my new one, was sitting on the coffee table. Open. It hadn't been there when we left. The screen showed a text file. Just one line. "You can't hide from someone who knows you." That was the last straw. Mark called it in. They dusted for prints, checked the building's security cam. The hard drive had been wiped, and took my laptop as evidence. The FBI got involved. They tracked the payload from the original image, traced its origin to a string of international proxies, and eventually flagged it as part of a larger investigation into dark web stalking. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. 0x Shepard had been targeting multiple women, most of them coders, moderators, or whistleblowers on dark web forums. He'd infected devices, stolen data, recorded through webcams. In 2 cases, he'd shown up at their homes. He was never caught, but the attack stopped. I changed my name online, deleted every account, burned old backups, went offline for 6 months. When I came back, I used a new handle, new protocols, new everything. I never posted on the Lantern again. In fact, I never logged into a dark web forum again.